Many in the Black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
Political author and podcaster Coleman Hughes went on The View with Sunny Hostin and Whoopi Goldberg. Sunny Hostin immediately had serious disagreements with Coleman Hughes. So we're going to play the clips, some clips of that, and discuss it. We're also going to get into Anna Kasparian analyzing what took place in these now viral clips. And I will also interject with my reaction to this. So we're going to start out with The View and then get into what Anna Kasparian had to say.
Many in the Black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
He's not a Republican.
I don't think there's any evidence I've been co-opted by anyone, and I think that's an ad hominem tactic people use to not address really the important conversations we're having here.
Political author and analyst Coleman Hughes was recently met with some intense hostility, specifically from Sunny Hostin on The View, as he appeared on the show to promote his new book, The End of Race Politics: Arguments for a Colorblind America. At a time when the culture in America has essentially rejected colorblindness, instead embracing an almost obsessive focus on race and how we differ from one another, I honestly wasn't shocked that he was met with that kind of vitriol. We'll get back to that portion of the exchange in just a minute. But first, I do think it's actually important to understand Coleman as a person and the argument he's trying to make. In the interest of full disclosure, though, I do have to admit that I'm a fan of Coleman's, even though he and I have some disagreements. On some issues, he definitely leans to the right of me, but I actually find him to be thoughtful.
Now, I'll admit that I wasn't familiar with Coleman Hughes before this appearance on The View. It's gotten a lot of attention online. And as Anna Kasparian has to say here, he does make thought-provoking arguments that seem to be in good faith. And we need more of that in our political discourse and what we're seeing on TV in terms of politics and online, because there is so much. This person is placed in the right-wing box, this person is placed in the left-wing box, and there are no shades of gray. And I really believe that most people in our society, it's not that easy to place people directly into certain boxes. And so I think we need more people like him in our political discourse. As you'll see in this video, he speaks to them calmly and rationally and tries to back up his points. And Sunny Hostin is not having any of it.
He makes thought-provoking arguments in good faith. And I don't know about you, but I've been increasingly bored with shows that have default ideological talking points that hosts never deviate from. It's a mindless snooze fest. Sometimes Coleman's analysis on certain current events challenge my own, and I find that to be a good thing. We should all be willing to challenge and reevaluate our own beliefs without assuming the one challenging us is some grifter or right-wing pawn.
Anna Kasparian is 100% right about what she's saying here. We definitely need more of this in political discussion in our country.
I think it makes us smarter and mentally stronger. Now, with that out of the way, let's hear Coleman out on the direction he believes policy should go in America.
The default right now in a lot of areas of policy is to use, Black and Hispanic identity as a proxy for disadvantage. And my argument is that you actually get a better picture of who needs help by looking at socioeconomics and income. That picks out people in a more accurate way.
I would totally agree with what Coleman Hughes is saying here. I live in a state that is almost 92% white. The median household income in my state is about $52,000. And we are at the bottom of all economic factors in the United States. So the poverty and the lack of opportunity in a state like mine has nothing to do with race.
Economics picks out people in a better way than race. when you do look at the socioeconomics, you see the huge disparity between white households and black households. You see the huge disparity between white households and Hispanic households. So your argument, and I've read your book twice because I wanted to give it a chance, your argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed.
Look, I think Sunny Hostin's lack of logic here is what's fundamentally flawed.
And one thing that I'd like to point out before we get into more of what Anna Kasparian has to say here is recently Sunny Hostin said on The View that climate change causes earthquakes and eclipses. So after saying that, it doesn't appear that Sunny Hostin does a lot of research on The View, and you really have to wonder about her credibility on anything.
Keeping it real. It's somewhat strange how triggered she is by the notion that we should focus economic policies on class rather than identity like race. I assure you there are plenty of poor people of all races in America. However, she herself is a wealthy woman of color, so maybe class-based issues don't appeal to her the same way as they would for the working poor in America. And while it is true that Black and Latino Americans are more economically disadvantaged on average, it's also true that class-based policies would disproportionately benefit their lives without leaving poor white Americans behind. Why is that a bad thing? Don't we want to see all of our fellow Americans succeed, regardless of religion, race, gender, sexual orientation, etc.?
We should. Unfortunately, some people don't feel that way. But yes, we should be striving for all Americans to succeed, regardless of race, regardless of sexual orientation,
etc. Class-based economic policies have more buy-in among voters and tend to be harder to repeal because they're applied to everyone impacted by poverty. Coleman managed to maintain his composure, something that he's insanely skilled in, and responded, in my opinion, perfectly.
There's two separate questions. One is whether each racial group is socioeconomically the same. That I agree with you, they're not.
Yeah, they're not, and the stats show that.
But yeah, of course, I agree with that fully. The question is, how do you address that in the way that actually targets poverty the best?
Great.
And what Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, is he called it, we need a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And he said, yes, we should address racial inequality. Yes, we should address the legacy of slavery. But the way to do that is on the basis of class. And that will disproportionately target blacks and Hispanics because they're disproportionately poor, but it will be doing so in a way that also helps the white poor, in a way that addresses poverty as the thing to be addressed.
He's right. I mean, I think he makes really good points there. But look, maybe Sunny Hostin has a counterpoint that we haven't even considered. So let's keep an open mind and give her a chance to respond.
You claim that color blindness was the goal of the civil rights movement, based upon Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, content of character versus the color of skin. He also said in 1968, it was about less than a week before he was assassinated, this country never stops to realize that they owe a people kept in slavery for 244 years. So rather than class, he did write about that earlier on. Right before his death, he made the argument for racial equality and racial reparations. And so your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted.
The quote that you just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro, that's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was.
Yes.
And it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based policy.
But he also says you must include race.
No, he didn't. He says it's
yes, he does.
Okay, well, everyone should go read the book Why We Can't Wait.
I gotta say, I mean, I didn't notice until this very moment, but the fact that she's rejecting class-based politics while wearing a Gucci button-down and a Gucci belt is hilarious. But
this article is from Jacobin, and the headline is MLK was a radical who hated not only class subordination, but class exploitation. It says here, throughout his adult life, Martin Luther King Jr. believed in striking down not only racial apartheid, but class exploitation. That twin commitment was embodied in his final effort, the often forgotten Poor People's Campaign. There was a book written by Sylvie Laurent called King and the Other America, The Poor People's Campaign and the Quest for Economic Equality, about the so-called second phase of the civil rights movement, King's radical views on issues like automation and universal basic income, and how the Poor People's Campaign fit into King's politics of collective liberation. Here it says, he had expressed deep concerns over economic exploitation, the ravages of capitalism, and the concentration of wealth since its early 20s. The civil rights-centered agenda that dominated prior to 1964 had always been suffused with class-based and labor-related demands. But the legal protection of Black lives and the reclaiming of Black legal rights were a prerequisite to the broad restructuring of society necessary for the full emancipation of the worker and the poor. So worker of the poor and the poor, that's all workers and all poor, not just certain races. Not only did King constantly point at the economic injustices that underpin the racial inequality of America and support progressive labor unions, but he frequently drew analogies between the poverty-stricken white man who lost his job to the Black exploited worker. Uniting the poor for the purpose of universal emancipation had been on his mind all along. So, what Sunny Hostin is saying is not correct, that we should only be looking at race. If you're looking at what Martin Luther King said, it was not just based on race. He was fighting for all poor people. Unfortunately, you're not going to get a lot of discussion about these topics. You'll get discussions of race, but you are not going to get discussions of the fact that Martin Luther King was a socialist. He was fighting against capitalism. He was fighting against the system, the economic system that was in place and is still in place. And he was fighting for the rights of all underprivileged people, all workers, and not just Black people or other minorities. You're not going to hear that on Fox or CNN or MSNBC or ABC, which broadcast The View. And like Anna Kasparian said, Sunny Hostin and these other members of The View are very wealthy people. So they don't want to have a discussion about Martin Luther King being a socialist. They only want to discuss the racial aspects of Martin Luther King. But what do you think? What do you think about what Coleman Hughes had to say? What do you think about what Sunny Hostin had to say? What do you think about Anna Kasparian? Who was right here? Who was wrong? Or is it, as I believe, a more nuanced conversation than what just took place on this show? Let me know in the comments. Give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.